In this episode, we're going to focus on a reality that can feel uncomfortable at first, but becomes a sign of maturity once you accept it, which is that attribution is not a one-time verdict. Attribution is an evolving assessment that should change as new signals emerge, because intrusions are dynamic and evidence accumulates unevenly over time. Beginners sometimes think changing an attribution view is embarrassing, like admitting you were wrong, so they cling to an early conclusion even when the evidence starts to shift. That is exactly the opposite of what good intelligence work looks like, because disciplined analysts expect their understanding to sharpen, narrow, or even pivot as more data becomes available. The goal is not to lock in a label quickly, but to keep the organization aligned to the best supported picture at each moment. Reassessment is also how you avoid being manipulated by early artifacts that are easy to fake or borrow. If you can learn to reassess attribution calmly and transparently, you protect decisions from drifting out of sync with reality. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. New signals emerge for many reasons, and understanding those reasons helps you see reassessment as normal rather than disruptive. Sometimes you collect more internal telemetry as response progresses, such as discovering additional affected hosts, uncovering evidence of lateral movement, or finding persistence mechanisms that were not visible initially. Sometimes your organization receives additional reports from partners or external researchers that reveal broader campaign context, such as infrastructure overlaps or shared procedure-level behaviors across victims. Sometimes the adversary changes behavior in response to containment steps, revealing fallback methods and operational habits that were hidden earlier. Sometimes you simply correct a misunderstanding, like fixing a time normalization issue that changes the timeline and clarifies which actions occurred first. Each of these signals can affect attribution confidence because attribution is built on patterns, and patterns become clearer as the sample size grows. When you expect signals to emerge in waves, you stop treating the first picture as final. A practical starting point for reassessment is to remember what you are actually reassessing, because attribution has layers. You might be reassessing whether incidents are linked to the same cluster, which is a linkage question. You might be reassessing the likely objective and operator behavior, which is a characterization question. You might be reassessing a specific identity hypothesis, which is the highest risk layer because it is easiest to overreach and hardest to support. These layers should not move together automatically, because it is possible to increase confidence in linkage while decreasing confidence in a particular identity label. It is also possible to discover the activity is broader than initially thought while still being uncertain about who is behind it. When you separate layers, reassessment becomes more precise and less emotionally charged, because you can update only the layer that changed. This also makes communication easier because you can tell leaders exactly what changed and what did not. The most important reassessment habit is to continuously compare new evidence against the assumptions embedded in the current attribution view. Every attribution conclusion depends on assumptions, even if they are not spoken, such as assuming infrastructure is controlled by the same actor over time or assuming a capability is unique enough to imply linkage. When new signals arrive, you ask which assumptions they support and which they weaken. If you find that infrastructure overlap was central to your linkage and the new evidence shows the infrastructure was likely compromised and shared, that should reduce confidence in the linkage. If you find that procedure-level behaviors repeat across incidents, such as the same sequence of actions and the same timing rhythms, that should increase confidence in linkage even if infrastructure changes. This approach keeps reassessment grounded because it ties updates to specific reasoning points. It also reduces the risk that reassessment becomes a vague feeling rather than a disciplined adjustment. Timelines are one of the most powerful tools for reassessment because new time-based signals can change the entire interpretation of an event. If you initially believe the intrusion began with a suspicious email, but later telemetry shows unusual authentication and service access days earlier, the initial access story changes. That change can affect attribution because different actors favor different entry paths, and the sequence of tactics can indicate different operational models. If you later discover that certain events happened after your containment step rather than before, you may realize that what looked like adversary activity was actually part of defensive remediation or normal recovery processes. Cadence changes can also reveal new information, such as interactive bursts that suggest human control or regular beacons that suggest automation. When you update a timeline and it reveals a new rhythm, you may need to reassess which capabilities and procedures are most consistent with the observed pattern. Timeline updates are not just clerical corrections. They are evidence upgrades that can shift attribution logic. Another category of new signals comes from deeper artifact analysis, which can either strengthen or weaken a linkage hypothesis. Early in an incident, analysts may rely on shallow artifacts because they are easiest to collect, such as file names, hashes, and simple string matches. As response continues, you may obtain richer behavioral details, such as how a capability persists, how it encodes network traffic, or how it interacts with system components. Those deeper details can reveal that what you thought was one family is actually a different capability with similar superficial traits. They can also reveal distinctive implementation choices that are rare and therefore more supportive of a linkage claim. The important point is that deeper artifacts often carry different weight than early artifacts, and reassessment should reflect that. If you replace weak evidence with stronger evidence, your confidence can increase even if the visible indicators change. If deeper analysis contradicts early assumptions, you should update quickly rather than defending the early label out of habit. Infrastructure signals also evolve rapidly, and reassessment should treat infrastructure as both useful and fragile. You might initially link activity based on a domain or address, but later learn that the infrastructure was part of a common hosting pattern used by many unrelated actors. Conversely, you might initially dismiss infrastructure overlap as generic, but later discover distinctive patterns such as consistent certificate reuse, registration habits, or rotation behaviors that suggest a single operator's workflow. You might also observe new infrastructure being activated after a block, revealing a fallback chain that can connect incidents more strongly than the original endpoint. These kinds of updates can change your confidence in how infrastructure relates to adversary identity. The key is to avoid treating infrastructure as either meaningless or definitive, because it can be both depending on context. Reassessment is the process of reweighting infrastructure evidence as you learn more about its uniqueness and control. Victim and targeting signals can also shift attribution, especially when you discover the incident is part of a broader set of targeting than initially understood. Early in response, you may see only the affected systems you have identified, which can create the impression of narrow targeting. Later, you may find additional affected users, departments, or systems, revealing a pattern of victim selection that suggests a specific objective. For example, a pattern that consistently reaches for identity services, administrative tooling, or certain business workflows can indicate intent and capability maturity. If you discover that multiple organizations in a sector are seeing similar targeting at the same time, that can strengthen a campaign linkage hypothesis. On the other hand, if targeting appears random and widely distributed across unrelated systems, it may suggest opportunistic activity rather than a focused campaign. New victim signals, therefore, can reshape not only who you think is behind the activity, but what you think they are trying to achieve. Responsible reassessment treats targeting patterns as evolving evidence, not as a fixed early impression. Adversary response behavior is another major source of new signals, because the moment defenders apply pressure, the adversary often reveals habits. If you cut off one access path and the adversary immediately attempts another, that shows persistence and determination, which may align with certain operational models. If the adversary abandons the operation quickly after minor resistance, that suggests a different risk profile and possibly a different motivation set. If they shift to more aggressive actions after containment, that could indicate a goal to maximize damage before losing access, which changes the threat picture. Observing these responses helps reassess because operational habits are harder to fake consistently than static artifacts. This is also why including defender actions in your timeline is so important, because the interaction between defender and adversary can reveal the adversary's playbook. Reassessment that incorporates response behavior is often more accurate than reassessment that focuses only on initial artifacts. A critical part of reassessment is communicating updates responsibly, because leaders and teams can lose trust if updates feel like random reversals. The best approach is to frame updates as evidence-driven refinement, stating what new signals appeared, what part of the attribution view they affect, and what the practical implications are. If you previously suggested a likely actor but now believe that identity hypothesis is weak, you can explain that new analysis shows the capability is more widely used than initially thought, so the identity claim is being downgraded while linkage remains under review. If you previously believed incidents were linked and now believe they are separate, you can explain which overlap was reinterpreted and why, such as infrastructure being shared. This kind of message is sober because it is specific, and it protects decision-makers by showing them how the new evidence changes what they should assume. It also prevents the organization from anchoring on the first label because you are teaching them that attribution is a living assessment. When updates are communicated clearly, they become part of a healthy intelligence process rather than a credibility crisis. Reassessment also benefits from keeping a disciplined record of what you believed when and why, because this is how you learn and improve. If you document early hypotheses and the evidence supporting them, you can later evaluate whether your initial reasoning was appropriate given the data available at the time. This is different from judging whether the early hypothesis turned out to be correct, because a reasonable early hypothesis can later be disproven by new evidence. The value is in understanding which signals were most misleading, which assumptions were fragile, and which types of evidence should be weighted differently next time. Over time, this habit improves your ability to form early assessments without overreach, because you learn where early uncertainty tends to hide. It also improves team trust because it shows that updates are not arbitrary. They are based on a traceable chain of reasoning. In a sense, reassessment is not just about changing conclusions. It is about improving the process that produces them. Finally, it helps to remember that reassessment is not only about downgrading confidence, because it can also strengthen confidence when the evidence converges. If new procedure-level behaviors repeat across incidents and align with earlier hypotheses, you can responsibly raise confidence in linkage. If you receive independent corroboration from external sources that match what you observed internally, you can strengthen the case for a campaign connection. If you observe distinctive adaptation behaviors that are consistent with a particular operational pattern over time, you can improve your understanding of adversary habits even if identity remains uncertain. The key is that confidence changes should move both directions based on evidence, not based on pressure or desire for closure. This balanced posture is what makes reassessment feel professional rather than defensive. When you treat updates as normal, you create an environment where learning is valued and where the organization stays aligned to reality. As we wrap up, reassessing attribution as new signals emerge is a core discipline of credible intelligence work, because attribution is built on patterns that become clearer as evidence accumulates. You begin by recognizing that new signals will arrive from internal telemetry, deeper analysis, infrastructure evolution, targeting discovery, and adversary response to defensive pressure. You reassess by separating layers of attribution, such as linkage, characterization, and identity, and by comparing new evidence to the assumptions that support the current view. You use timelines and cadence to test narrative coherence, and you reweight evidence as it becomes deeper and more reliable. You communicate updates as evidence-driven refinements with clear implications, and you keep a record so the team can learn which signals misled and which signals clarified. Most importantly, you treat confidence as something that must move with evidence, not with ego, because the organization's decisions depend on your ability to stay aligned to reality. When you build this habit, your attribution work becomes more trustworthy over time, and that trust is what turns threat intelligence into true decision support.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.